Welcome to Audio for VR, presented by Skullcandy. Please welcome your panelists, Martin Walsh, Sam Paschal, and Ola Bjorling, and moderator Robert Dalton Jr.
We should switch musical chairs. Otherwise, they won't know who we are. Yeah. Test. Okay. Thank you all for coming. Really excited to kind of kick off this conversation about audio in VR. So we're gonna there's a lot of topics we can cover, a lot of areas. We're gonna kind of keep it very general. If you have any questions, we have this kind of distinguished panel of experts here that really cover the entire gamut of audio. So if it's technical, if it's about content, if it's about hardware, headphones, distribution, we can answer it. So we'll have some time at the end of the session to take some questions from the audience. But before we get started, I thought we could throw out a few questions to the audience to kind of maybe help us guide how the conversation happens up here. So maybe by show of hands, how many people here are content creators? Wow, okay, a lot of content creators. How many people are consumers interested in like the VR experience and maximizing the VR experience? Okay, cool. And how many people have had a really compelling experience in audio for VR so far? Not so many. I think there's something to be said there. And how many people think that audio is kind of is good where it's at for VR? And nobody. Okay, that's what I suspected. So we'll touch on some of those things. But before we get started, I just would like the panelists can introduce themselves and offer just kind of a brief description of who they are and what they're doing and how it pertains to VR. So we'll start and just go down the row here.
All right, I'm Ula. I'm head of virtual reality for a production company called Media Monks. We're like 500 people or so. We don't quite know. Pretty big. And I've been doing VR for about 4 years at this point.
I'm Sam Paschal. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for Skullcandy. We're here today as a sponsor of VRLA and just trying to further the conversation on how audio can be used to create even more and better immersive experiences in VR.
Hi, I'm Martin. I've actually been doing 3D audio for my day job for nearly 22 years now. So it's finally fantastic that it's once again having its day. It's kind of cyclical. I lead a group of research engineers. We're doing a lot of collaborations right now with people creating VR content and consulting with them on how to integrate good 3D audio experiences within that content towards actually developing an end-to-end solution for content creators in the next year or so that will kind of like be more about solving people's real problems.
Great. So let's just kind of start at very, very high level here. So audio is for, I heard somebody call them flatties today. Rectangular video, right? Flatties, I thought that was brilliant. But audio has kind of been like the emotional driver for that kind of content, right? And so as we move to more spherical content, excuse me, does it have the same role, or does that role change? So what do you guys see? What's the fundamental role of audio for VR, for the spherical content?
I mean, so as important as it is in sort of just a flat world, and as much as it drives the emotion of being drawn into a piece of content, I feel like in VR it's even more important. I've had a bunch of experiences just out there on the floor today and yesterday, where it was a piece, a really compelling, really amazing pieces of content, but where something was happening outside of my immediate field of vision, and because it is so immersive and you can look anywhere and do anything, I'd miss key parts of a story, I'd miss key parts of a narrative, or I'd miss something that was a really cool part of the experience, and there was no cue to tell me to pay attention to it. So from like an evolution standpoint, our field of vision is, if you're great in the peripherals, is less than 180 degrees. And we rely on anything outside of that field of vision. It's your hearing. If you were a little cave person, you'd listen for a sound that was happening somewhere around you, and that would be like, okay, is that something that I need to run from? Is it something that's going to eat me? Is it something that I can eat? And your hearing was a thing that would just tell you where to go and where to pay attention to. So in addition to just driving a lot of the emotional content of an immersive piece of media, even in a flat screen. Audio does that, but in the VR space, as things can happen anywhere around you and it's supposed to be immersive, the audio is a cue for you if it's done really well and it's an immersive sort of audioscape to tell you where to pay attention to in the experience or narrative. So I think it's not even staying flat with what existing media is. In the VR world, it becomes even more important as you want to create a really immersive environment where anything can happen around you.
Yeah, I think it changes on both the technical side and on the narrative or sort of experience side. So technically, of course, it needs to be spatialized. So a sound here now would be in front of me if I turn to it and so on. And that goes for direction, it goes for height, it goes for front, back. And there's issues with that because what you're doing is you're simulating the human outer ear. The outer ear is what, and the time difference between the ears is what allows us to localize sound largely. And you're doing that with sound engines, so you're applying the same sort of frequency changes to a sound, but in regular headphones, as though it would have come from outside of your head at a specific angle. But those equalization curves, called HRTF, head-related transfer functions, they can degrade sound. So, for example, a complex waveform like crashing surf can sound like crumpling paper once it's fed through that. It'll sound like crumpling paper from a very specific direction, but it's not going to sound like crashing surf anymore. So that's a technical challenge of sort of combining the accurate spatial positioning of audio with great sound quality. But then there's things like, so you mentioned in Flatties how we've used sound, and of course a huge thing is music. So film music is an emotional guide. No one's like playing the instrument in the scene mostly, but we still accept it in film simply because there's this contract with the viewer that this is an emotional guide telling you how to feel about the scene. But that's because you're imagining yourself into a rectangle. Then that kind of contract works. But once you're in VR, if we're trying to actually make you feel like you're there, this much talked about word of presence, that type of non-diegetic sound, so non-diegetic is a term for sound that doesn't belong in the scene, and diegetic sound would be something that belongs in the scene. So non-diegetic sound, which is a voiceover or music, that can actually, in VR, make you go, where's that coming from? Because that breaks immersion because suddenly the scene is not real because it's not coming from in there. So that changes the rules for how you use sound as well.
Right.
So how do you like enhance the emotional impact of a scene if you can't just break out the string orchestra in the same way?
Right.
And if you do, does that work, or do you like go, oh, someone's like deliberately pushing my emotional buttons a little bit too hard with a little? That should be more of a subtle thing in VR.
So 3D audio, it's not a new term, Martin. I mean, Martin's our resident expert here, right, on 3D audio. He's been researching this stuff for years, and Creative Labs is doing it. DTS was doing it. I mean, this is not a new phenomenon, not new technology.
Not by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, the first application of 3D audio was virtual reality back in the early 90s.
Wow.
And most of the research for 3D audio that's being applied today is actually about 20, 30 years old. And it was actually developed mostly at NASA and around situational awareness for cockpits and for fighter pilots, that kind of thing. And in a way, situational awareness is still the biggest application we have for VR today. It's a different kind of situational awareness. I can actually close my eyes and just listen to this room, and I know where I am. I know where you are. I know how close you are to me. The other thing is that situational awareness can be used and manipulated to evoke emotion. And a perfect example is actually we recently were participating at the 3D and VR Expo in Tokyo, and we did a demo where it was 100% audio only, and it was one of the most popular demonstrations, and it actually even got on the TV over some demos that were Oculus based and Vive based, because it actually evoked more emotion because you were left with one sense. The idea of the demo was we put somebody in a dark room. The only thing they had was their headphones and some manipulated 3D audio, and people were in tears.
Yeah, that's like the power of sound. We rarely break into tears from like just abstract colors, but we can actually be moved that way by frequencies alone. And so audio or listening as a human sense is like less cognitive in a way, because it's more of a direct sort of emotional input. That's why we listen to music. We listen to music because it presses the emotional buttons we want press, and oh, that felt good, or that felt like I was feeling before, but more powerful. So it is a very like emotional sense, and of course, if you watch a horror film and turn off the sound, you're not going to be scared anymore. And you watch a horror film and you listen to the Benny Hill soundtrack and you'll laugh at really inappropriate things. And that's the power of audio. And so I think, and also like Sam was saying this too, you have that field of view, which is fairly limited. Plus you can close your eyes, so you can't close your ears, and you're listening in all directions at once. So it is the most fundamental sort of both spatial and emotional orientation sense, I would say.
So is VR, audio and VR, is that always going to be is that a headphone medium?
Not necessarily. There's interesting stuff being done with like other systems. There's two basic approaches, but I think Martin is going to add more to this list. But the two I know of is you can do very large speaker arrays. Either you can do like an actual multi-channel system, so not a 5.1, but like a 22.2 or whatever system, or even more. So you can have like 4 bass channels, so you have spatialization in bass even. Or you can do just almost like a speaker sound field, like a super long speaker array, which can then, which has to be really well calibrated, and you can actually sort of create 3D sound in a space, so you can walk around in that sound field. So those types of speaker setups is one. The other is you can actually do it, weirdly enough, with only 2 speakers. Normally, you can't have binaural audio through speakers, because binaural audio is recording one sound through a prosthetic ear and a microphone in that ear canal of a sort of a dummy head, and same on the other side. And you play it back in headphones, so what came into one side only goes into one ear. But when you play it in speakers, both ears hear both speakers. So that's why binaural audio normally doesn't work over speakers. But there's ways now with very high processing power and tracking your head in real time. I think it's from Princeton University, a system called Buck 3D, that they use a Kinect and track you, and then with a DSP, alter the output of the speaker, so you can walk around and it sounds 3D from only 2 speakers. And you'll hear sound from outside of the speakers. You have the speaker here, speaker there, but sound coming from here.
It's probably safe to say that for mass adoption, it's going to have to be some kind of mobile format. If that's, I mean, I can see installations, mobile or like big installations where you go have an experience. But Sam, what are your thoughts on like what's the importance of the headphone experience for VR?
Not biased at all.
Yeah, you're the expert there.
I don't
Just
have
headphones in general.
I don't have a dog in this hunt at all. It doesn't matter to me. We're actually in the business of making and selling headphones, so the technical knowledge on this stage outstrips what I bring. I'm the product development and marketing guy for Skullcandy. I'm really disappointed to find out that Ola has unearthed a couple of ways that speaker arrays can be used to replace our product line. So
I apologize. I take everything back.
I'm actually just kind of looking for the off button on the mic, and because no, I think you nailed it. I think for at scale, this experience, we can't tell what somebody's first experience is going to be with virtual reality. That could be Google Cardboard, it could be Samsung Gear VR, it could be Vive, it could be any one or something that isn't done yet. And I think that having products that we know will recreate an immersive and really solid VR experience for them across a broad range of visual hardware options is critically important, because the technology is a medium, and I think we were speaking to some of it already, that has the power, like, right now it's about provocation and titillation and adventure and entertainment, but the education opportunities, the opportunities as an empathy machine to help people see through other people's eyes, the applications of this medium are huge, and I think that if audio continues to trail for too long, that promise is broken as far as immersion goes, and people could not adopt it as quickly or not adopt it at scale. I think the audio piece, if you want to have a truly immersive environment and not break that contract with the consumer or the user, that audio has to catch up and be at the forefront. And I'm enthused with how many panels have covered audio, the number of people on this stage that are engaged in making the audio better and more immersive in VR, and the amount of conversation and the improvements in the audio experiences that I'm seeing here at the show this year versus what's happened in the last 2 years of sort of attending things like this. it feels like people are getting the message and it's catching up a bit.
Well, I think a big thing too is ensuring that the experience that people are getting, because there's all these different platforms, right? And how do you ensure that everybody is getting what you would consider as a content creator, as a technology developer, like how do you ensure that you're delivering the experience that you want to deliver across all these different platforms?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big issues we have today. I mean, even when you think about, if we say, okay, let's assume you're only doing headphones. Well,
That's a good assumption.
headphones radically differ in their frequency responses.
Yeah,
Whether they're earbuds,
right.
whether they're over their ear, whether.
Right.
And so one of the things we advocate is somewhat of a normalization. In a way, having a monitoring headphone response. You can do that using DSP, where essentially at the creation side, just like somebody mixing for speakers will have a very expensive studio with some very expensive monitors. Anybody creating content now, VR is one of the very first media that actually requires you to mix for headphones, or fundamentally requires you to mix for headphones. And so from that perspective, you really should have a reference that I'm going to be able to pretty much predict what the consumer is going to hear when they play this through a variety of other headphones. And you can do that using DSP. The method we've come up with is we actually are developing a database of headphone EQs in the cloud. And so on your mobile device, it will actually essentially look up your headphone model and correct its EQ so that it's more akin to this reference EQ. But not only that, because it's 3D audio, another thing about this medium that's different than all the other is that there is very little control on the rendering on the other side. And the rendering is no longer just what headphones, it's also what algorithms are being applied to your content. If you play something over, say, YouTube 360, it's going to sound radically different than something that was played over the Oculus Video Store or some other, conglomerate, even if you're all using Dysonics.
Right.
And that's another, I wouldn't call it an issue, but it's another thing to worry about as you're making content, is what is it going to sound like when it's being reproduced in various formats.
That's a really good point, because it's the same format. I mean, we can talk for audio formats for days, right? I mean, that's VR audio is difficult. VR audio in general, there's all different kinds of formats, right? The video is pretty much standard, right? But so the rendering the rendering of that audio, even though it's the same format, is different, right? So is there any way? I know you guys are doing something on the headphone side, but is that like a certification process that needs to happen?
We wouldn't go that far, but we do have a program. I wouldn't.
Okay.
And one of the things that's actually in a way more important, and I'll be neutral rather than espouse what we're doing, is just having the ability to monitor your content in the production tool, and to actually, at least even within that production tool, be able to predict what it sounds like on various devices, various platforms, so that you can basically give a thumbs up. In the music world, people used to go and stick a tape into a car, make sure it sounds good on that medium. I think that kind of thing is still very important for content developers today, and for me, for VR.
And Oculus, of course, for the Rift, they added headphones to the Rift because they wanted there to be a standard target for all developers, so that they know the frequency response. And of course, the headphones they built into that headset has to be on some level a compromise, because people balked at the $599 price, and that's with these headphones. And then people complain about the quality of the headphones, and like, okay, well, you can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
So, and then also they're sort of a semi-open back on-ear solution, which means that in any sort of space that isn't super quiet, you're going to have ambient sound leaking in, and that's really going to undermine immersion. So, which is why Oculus demo in soundproofed rooms when they have setups at shows. For home use, it's probably not going to matter, but for many people, their VR virginity is lost at a convention show, sort of. Right. So, then you maybe shouldn't have ambient sound leaking in. Maybe you should be able to commit to it and have a good time.
So what changes in the actual content creation process now? Is that a drastically different process, or is that something that is just a small little leap to spherical content.
Oh, it changes every day. And not only does it change when you start to get into 360, but it also changes. Like, and even if we're thinking just linear content, because we also have game engine type stuff. So in a game engine, you have sound objects, and you can trigger different sounds at different times, and multiple sounds maybe, or just a single, and so on. But if we're thinking linear content, we're thinking about film, for example, you still don't have the same control over the mix, because depending on the user's viewing angle at any given point in time, that will result in a slightly different audio mix, and there's no real way to survey all possible combinations of viewing angles and points in time in a mix. That I know of currently, so you have to be careful with that sometimes, and like then you gotta avoid clipping, so that it affects how you approach the mix. And then the tool sets change every day. And then we were talking about the target platforms. Martin was mentioning how it's gonna sound different on Oculus Video versus YouTube, and that's a very, very good observation. There's a big difference, and there's new formats coming to these as well. YouTube's first order Dysonics support is kind of new. And there's new updates coming to Oculus Videos in the fall, where they're going to support more formats. There's also Samsung VR, previously known as Milk VR on Gear VR, which uses Fraunhofer Singo. But within Fraunhofer Singo, there's multiple spatial audio formats as well. And so if you're making a piece of content, if you're making a VR film and you're making audio for this, how do you even begin recording and then mixing the audio so that you're set up to be able to output to target all of these, or do you have to pick one? That's a very real challenge in production right now, so you need to be very strategic and do your homework first, and like properly think through where should this live.
Yeah, I think audio production, I hate the word paradigm shift, but it literally is going through a paradigm shift for linear VR audio. Essentially, we deal a lot with people who have been conventional mixers, and they come to a project as if it's another conventional mixing project. And there's things like, which generally means everything's done in post. We'll worry about it in post. We'll just record lots of stuff and we'll worry about it in post. And they're not including audio as part of the storytelling. And that's just, and when I say that, I mean practically that's a nightmare. Because you can end up with getting video back that has edits every 20 seconds. And when you think about, what do you do with the audio, right? Because traditional flat video is third-person perspective. VR is first-person perspective. Right. So when I get a different viewpoint on my VR video, do you give me a new sound field? How do you crossfade the old sound field into the new sound field? Because if you think about like a concert on a DVD, it's the same audio track during all of those edits. It has nothing to do with what it actually sounds like to be at the concert.
Right.
And so they can get on stage, they can go on side stage. When you're actually working on a real concert and they give you side stage, are you like, okay, so how does that sound? Do I actually give people what that sounds like? Because that sounds terrible. You know, there's all those kinds of things where you really have to storyboard the audio into the production at the get-go. And so there's lots of those kinds of paradigm shifts. Similarly, people who are used to conventional regular video, they have rules of thumb. The center channel has my vocals. All vocals go in that center channel. That's effects, and this is ambience. And now you go and you tell people, no, you actually have to put the sound exactly where people are seeing it. And it has to be in all 360 degrees. And you have to figure out how to match that audio with the video. And by the way, there's not a single tool that allows you to do that today. And so from that, it's a nightmare in a way. And I think like when we get better tools, that process will be semi-automated, and also, you know, it'll be less of a nightmare for post-production.
Yeah, I think that there are two sets of challenges there, and I think you guys have nailed both of them. The first is technically, how do you do this, and how do you create these soundscapes and these sound fields that, again, don't break that contract and keep that feeling of immersion. And then the other thing for all the content creators in the room is like, what is the conceptual decisions that are being made about audio's place in the story making, and because I know you hate storytelling, in the story making that happens in the VR world, and like those need to come together. Both the technical challenges are not non-trivial. Like they're really hard things to solve for and do. And then conceptually, how do we understand how audio needs to evolve within the content creation in virtual reality, because you could be really overbearing with it and like try to beat people over the head, and that if it shines too much, it can break the contract in the same way as having no audio or flat audio that doesn't directionalize.
Right. So assume we're in an ideal world now, and cost wasn't an issue, and marketing wasn't an issue. Like, what is the ideal experience? Like, what's the holy grail of an audio experience in VR, and how would you deliver that again if there weren't barriers there?
Conceptually or technically? Because technically, you're
Both,
going to
a
look
little
at
bit.
the
We can
other
touch on-
guys on
yeah.
the stage, 100%. I followed for most of you here, I followed maybe 3/4 of what these guys are talking about. Luckily, we have people on my team that could follow all of it and contribute in a different way, but it's not me. Conceptually, I don't know that we know yet. I mean,
Yeah.
we worked on an audio first with MediaMonks, an audio first application that's trying to have the audio lead and the visuals follow, so that people can really start to think about what happens if you put this first. The horror genre, which is one of the big genres that's being consumed, I had an experience where in the middle of it, the lights went out in the middle of this experience. And that's already, you're in an immersive environment, you see things that are somewhat disturbing, depending on your background. It might have been totally normal for some of you, but was disturbing for me. And the lights go out. Now, in the real world, if that happened, the very first thing that I would be doing is listening really hard for what was happening around me, what was going on. As you stripped away, and what is, we go to visual first, it's where this technology, as it's reemerged and this wave is coming, is focused first, because there are a lot of challenges with nausea and just figuring out the visual field. When that got shut off, I think that kind of an experience where the visuals get shut off, and now, hey, in the real world, in a real immersive environment, like, you would be listening really hard for whatever the hell was going on around you, to know where to pay attention and where some kind of threat would come from in sort of a peak or an enhanced experience. And I feel like one of the ways that it could take a step forward would be, bring people into the visual space, have them see something really compelling that they're used to in VR, and then when you start to shut that sense down, you would behave, if you're really immersed, like you would in the real world, and really start listening for, what are the audio clues that tell me what's happening next? Where's this threat going to come from? That feels like we have content creators out here that are also more talented than I am. I don't know what I'm good at right now, actually. That we'll find out and figure out ways to create that peak audio experience. I don't think we know yet. I think that the best thing that the people on this stage can do, and the people that walk out of this room can do, is start to push audio forward as a critical component in compelling VR experiences. And I think even just that mindset of obsessing and focusing on the audio every day, to know that that's a critical part of this being successful, that's where that thinking and where those experiences are going to come from.
Yeah, I think technically you can place a microphone. So again, I'll use film as an example. Place a microphone on the camera. You'd probably today use a 4-channel ambisonics, a first-order ambisonic microphone, so you get some spatialization out of that. And so that you can listen from the position you're viewing, and listen in the direction that you're looking when you're seeing the experience. But doing it just for realism that way isn't necessarily the best experience. You probably benefit many times from doing that sort of hyper-real experience, elevating it slightly, giving the cues even slightly more spatial precision than you can get out of one of those microphones. You can do that with higher order ambisonics in post. And then there's things like, so if you use a voiceover or music, and I know I kind of turned that down before, but if you use something like that, so non-diegetic sound, you probably don't want that to be spatialized, because then it's something that doesn't exist visually in the scene, but that tracks with your head, like it still belongs in the scene when you move your head. That becomes weird. So then you need channels that can be omitted from spatialization, and that puts another demand on the playback engine than what you can achieve in, for example, YouTube 360 right now. They don't have support for that. It's not out now on Oculus videos either. It's coming. But it's supported by the sound engine that Oculus bought. It is supported by Google's spatial audio SDK that YouTube is not using. So it's a bit of a maze to try to navigate that.
Yeah, and Martin, so what about on the technical side of things, do we know all we need to know for about 3D audio and how to position audio in a 3D scene, or is there still a lot of work to be done to improve the effectiveness of positional sound?
I think it's a mixture. I think we know what we haven't done in the way. What I mean is that we know what the problem is. We have some solutions, but nobody has that solution. So a perfect example would be, so we have a lot of experience helping people produce live content. And one of the things about live content is that hyperrealism, right? So you're working with ESPN, they're doing the Super Bowl, and everything you're hearing out of your TV set has nothing to do with what anybody in that stadium is hearing, right? They've got parabolic microphones picking up the thud of the players against each other. You hear all that on your TV. You don't hear any of that. You hear some drunk guy from Milwaukee behind you, whatever it is. No offense to anybody from Milwaukee,
or anybody who's drunk.
I would never go there. But in a way, when you're talking about live production today, you're talking about putting one microphone in the middle of a camera and assuming that is actually what people want.
Right.
Which is not what they want.
Right.
And so part of the challenge isn't to give tools where they can start tracking all these individual components one by one. It's actually about automating that so that it's essentially, you can grab your things, you can automatically associate sounds with objects. So things like location tracking, live location tracking, where say in a sports event, you actually have a tracker on a player and you always know where the player is and you can always associate the sound of the player with the player. And in fact, the sound mixer's job is to make everything sound good again. And it's more about sound design than worrying about following one of 762 objects that are going around at any stage. So I think that's a big challenge, and that's something where, working that out is going to take a while. But I think it's actually going to take a lot of the work out of 3D audio, including 3D audio in your project. And I think one of the things that really puts off people from 3D audio today is it's a pain in the ass. The tools don't work. No offense, the tools don't work together. There's so many different formats. Even when there is the same format, there's different channel ordering. And then essentially people will go and they'll put something on YouTube 360 and it's backwards, or it's, because they had made some assumption about the channel ordering that's not the right thing. So then they have to go into some free hackable tool that allows you to go back in, demux your audio, change it. So I think once we get past that and we actually start to have really good tools that actually allows people to not take up 50% of their time trying to make this stuff work, I think that's going to be a kind of a watershed for 3D audio in VR.
Right.
Yeah, and to your point about integrating the tools, so yesterday there was a demonstration on this stage from the Foundry, who make a piece of software called Nuke, which is sort of the Photoshop of video. It's the industry standard video compositing tool, and there's a really, really compelling 360 aware tracking tool in there that you can place a tracker on a person and then get that tracking data out. But there's no way to get that tracking data into an audio authoring tool right now, even though we have the exact position of who we're tracking. So we're almost there, but almost doesn't get us across the finish line.
Yeah, I think before we had video people and we had audio people. Now we actually have to mix those and actually start coming out with AV tools.
Commingling.
Yeah.
What about and another headphone question here? Like I've seen a lot of headphones kind of get smarter, right, and do more processing in the headphones. And I've obviously we're doing that in hardware and the HMDs and in apps. Like, is there going to be consistency across like where's audio actually being processed? Does it matter? Are headphones going to get smarter? Or are headphones always going to be about just playing back an experience without worrying about doing the spatialization?
Yeah, I think the question it's an important one. I think it's too early to tell, really. My take, and I think Skullcandy's take on it, is that a lot of that processing has to happen in concert with the content creation and the concepting, and that downstream people are going to want the experience to be a satisfying experience regardless of the piece of hardware that they plug in. Of course, we want to make a headphone that's going to work great in that environment and that is optimized for VR, but you have an issue of if we add processing on the headphone side, depending on the output from the viewer or the content creator, they've ad processing. Like all of a sudden, you can do some things that either mute or change or just damage the spatialization. So I think that it will eventually come down to a smaller set of tools and a better set of tools that can create that audioscape. But I think that, for us, I think a lot of those decisions need to be made upstream. We need to make a headphone from Skullcandy that's going to be great at reproducing the sound as it was intended in the content creation and capture and processing. But I think if you add things on the headphone side until we get to some kind of standard way to handle this, Ola and I were talking earlier today, and he was talking about some of the double pinna challenges that go on if you try to use a head-related transfer function on top of stuff that's already been processed to create spatialization. Like, what's going to happen? Now add a third layer on that, and I put my processing on top of that, and you're going to end up with a really bad experience instead of a good one.
Yeah, and then there's interesting stuff being done, and so there's so many challenges. There's a lot of things you could do in the headphones. One thing that's speculated now is, Apple removing the headphone jack on the iPhone 7, and what does that mean? Because then you don't have an analog output in the signal anymore from the Lightning port. That means the digital to analog conversion happens in the cable to the headphones. There's a Californian headphone company that I won't name because I'm here with Skullcandy that have released a headphone that has that already.
There are other headphone companies out there?
Not as far as you know.
All right, good. Thank God it's not a competitive space.
Yeah. Well, and so you could do digital to analog conversion outside of the device. Now, there's still going to be this sort of price-performance ratio there. There's going to be then units that do that really well. And if anyone here hasn't heard a really absurdly expensive digital to analog converter, you might wonder how on earth that could make a difference for sound. It makes a huge difference for sound. It's a whole science of itself. And if you want to talk to me about that for 3 hours, meet me in the hallway afterwards. So that would be one thing that you could dive into, and then there's what previous session on the stage that OSIC, is that what they're called, are doing, which is the headphone that actually measures your pinna, which is your outer ear, so that you have a tailored HRTF sort of model for your ear, so that gets better spatialization, because the models that you use now, so you have a mono sound that you're processing through a spatialization engine, anyone on the market, which applies an EQ curve to that, plus channel delay between the ears, depending on where it's supposed to be sounding as though it's coming from. That is pretty standardized processing. That's like for a standard outer ear. What if you have like cauliflower ear because you wrestled in high school? What if, whatever, what if like all our outer ears are different? Which means that standard model might not work super well for you, so you don't get very good spatial precision. But with that, you could, in theory, get really, really good spatial precision. However, what if that sound that came to those headphones already had HRTF applied to it, to your point here? Then you have sound that is filtered to sound as though it's coming from a separate direction, but then you have headphones that tries to reapply something to that if it's not integrated all up the chain. When it is integrated all the way, maybe that's great, but that's also going to be potentially hard to standardize. I won't speak too much to their like business model around that, but there's so many different areas where headphones could do things. And I think a safe bet is to keep each component one component.
Yeah, I think you don't have to do the spatialization in the headphone. I'll just say that. But one of the things that could be important is actually relating more to the ergonomics of wearing headphones in the VR experience. So people don't like wearing headphones in VR because it shuts them out from the real world, and they get really paranoid that somebody's going to come up behind them, or it's you're completely shut out, and you get that sense of impending doom no matter what you're watching. Amazon actually recently issued, or it wasn't issued, but it was published a patent on the concept of the headphones are actually listening for your voice, for somebody to say your name or somebody to say something that it recognizes, and a lot of headphones now have microphones on the outside where they can become opaque, essentially, where there's basically a bleed through, where you can actually suddenly listen to the outside world. So you can dial that up where you can hear more or less of the outside world without having to wear open ear headphones. So there could be intelligence in that form, where the headphones could be kind of more self-aware or aware of your environment, so that they can actually, let you know when somebody's trying to get your attention, or
Right.
that there's a fire alarm or whatever.
Yeah, it seems like the ear fatigue would be a big thing, right? So wearing headphones for a long time. We also know like being in VR experience is very fatiguing. So I'm sure it's the same thing with the ears as well. We covered a lot of ground. We have some time left, but if there's questions in the audience, we can open it up now and start taking a few questions. You can take my mic, that's fine.
Hi, if I can be indulged 3 questions, if that's okay. So I'm Linda Gettimer from Source Sound. We've been doing audio for VR for about 3 years now. So I'm going to bug you guys a little bit. Martin, if you don't mind, you had mentioned about a lookup table for different types of headphones.
Yeah.
So you'll be inverting the transfer function of the headphones. Are you aiming for a flat response?
No. We've actually done a lot of, Sean Oliver Harmon has done a lot of research
I
into...
work with him on that.
Yeah.
That's why I asked.
And actually, coincidentally, I've actually been talking to Sean a lot. And coincidentally, we more or less came up with the same curve.
Right.
And the rule we applied when we were working on this reference curve is we would want a piece of music that somebody said was balanced on speakers to sound balanced on headphones.
Right.
And so that's kind of how we actually did it, not by saying this is the curve that, we actually did it consensus based by working with people who already work in studios
Right.
and are used to knowing what something that balanced sounds like. And then we actually ended up coming up with a curve that was almost similar to Harmon's curve.
Right. My cinema audio research, my PhD, came up with the same curve.
Okay, yeah.
It
So
seems
it's
to be-
obviously a magic
It's been
curve.
cropping up
Right,
since
yes.
1969 with Lundberg's research. So it's kind of an interesting thing. So I was curious if you were doing the inverse transfer function for flat, or if you were going to flatten them and then apply a
Right.
curve as part of the overall process.
We're trying to, but because the other thing is you can't make people use a certain pair of headphones
Right.
when they're producing content, and so we essentially equalize both at the production and the reproduction
which you would
side.
have to do. I mean, we're when my husband does audio, he's working usually with the Bose noise canceling, because he does a lot of work for John, and that's kind of John's preferred. So, which was another question I was gonna. By the way, excellent idea to have a lookup table for the different type headphones, because it's God only knows what people are going to listen to over these things. So I have I have some very expensive Stax headphones, and then there's going to be people running around in earbuds, so it's all
Right.
over the map. So my other question was the importance of noise canceling in headphones. What do you gentlemen feel about that? Because I know that there's a lot of people that are like, well, the Bose noise canceling are kind of the sort of the standard. You see a lot of that, especially when you're on these convention floors. You got to get the noise canceling so you can have at least a decent demo when you're in a convention hall. How do you feel about the requirement for noise canceling for VR headphones?
Yeah, I happen to have a strong opinion on this, despite owning a pair of these, because I fly so much and they really come in really handy there. But I will say this. So noise canceling works by phase inversion. So there's a microphone that records audio coming from the outside of the headphones, inverts the curve and plays that into the headphones, which means that the two waves cancel each other out and you get silence, ideally. However, that messes with the phase of the actual audio that you're hearing that's coming down the cable. And phase is actually, phase in this, it's P-H-A-S-E, is like where the peaks and valleys are of the curve. That can be shifted in time. It can be the same frequency, but it gets shifted slightly. When the brain localizes spatial positioning of audio, it actually uses phase to do that to some extent. So spatial positioning can become blurrier when you activate noise cancellation. So if you wear those Bose headphones and you have something that has really good spatialization, you can switch it on and off and hear how the object becomes blurrier in space. It is a subtle effect. So yes, for a showroom floor like this, the ability to avoid ambient sound leaking in, I think, is more important than that slight blurring of spatial positioning. But I would say that if you don't necessarily need to activate noise cancellation on headphones, I would definitely recommend avoiding it for headphones.
Great. And then I know you want the mic back. No, that's not good. One last question, and Ola, you brought this up with the OSIC headphones. Is generalized HRTF versus individualized HRTF? I need to go bug the folks over in the OSIC booth, but I thought that they weren't actually measuring the entire pinna, that they were actually just measuring the distance between the ears in their process.
I was told at GDC when I demoed them for the first time that was not the case, that they're doing both. I could be wrong, so I'm not,
Yeah.
I can't speak to their
They're-
product or their business model,
Yeah.
but I was told that they're doing two measurements.
Okay,
I-
I need to bug their
I think
R&D.
what they're doing is they're measuring your head size with
Yeah,
the headphones.
they're doing the
And then they
distance.
have multiple drivers in the headphones.
Right, so they're not
to-
actually measuring the pinna, they're measuring the distance between the ears, and then I think they have the drivers, but I need to bug their R&D people and find
Yeah,
out.
you
but-
gotta find. So Joy, who was on stage in the
Yeah.
previous session, that's their CTO. So she's here, so maybe not in the room, but she's at VRLA. So tall blonde woman. See if you find her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that used to be more true than it is now. And that is because we now have visual cues. Like audio, 3D audio without the individualization, yes, we had massive front-back confusions and stuff like that. But now we can see stuff in front of us. And it's a huge, I mean, when you actually think of the cinema, right? There's such a dislocation between what you're seeing and where the sound is actually coming from. It's coming from the center. There could be somebody over there. But with that visual cue, it will correct for, aberrations. Yeah.
Yeah, and on that note, there are multiple different HRTF data sets out there. Some are public, some are actually not. Some are research data. We have done some tests with a non-public research set that was fantastic for certain complex waveforms that you would otherwise have problems with, but unfortunately also disaster with other complex waveforms. So I couldn't do a lawnmower, but it was great with that crashing surf.
And okay.
Yeah, sorry, we got to do another question.
All right, I got one question. Jan Nordman with Fraunhofer. You all spoke about the challenges of different distribution platforms supporting different audio formats, different renderings, and what having different tools to make the content. How do you see the role of, or the power of standard bodies in that regard versus what big platforms like YouTube 360 or Facebook 360 just put out there? Some of them open source it and then have the entire content industry produced to that specific format that they propose. So how do you see the balance there developing over the next few years?
Okay, so it's too early. That's what I would say. I would say it's Wild West in need of a sheriff. But if the sheriff came and gave everybody the rules, everybody would be like, I don't know what you're talking about. So I think in a way, because everybody's using so many different techniques, everybody's experimenting right now and coming in and giving everybody a load of rules, it's just not going to work. I think once everybody has a consensus over we're roughly having the same workflow, we're roughly doing the same stuff, yes, it's a good idea to start doing it within a standardized process.
And to add to that, there's going to be different needs for different situations for the foreseeable future. So you have sometimes need for something object-based that I know you have coming in Zingo. I don't know if you have a deployed platform with that yet, and then there's Dolby Atmos that is object-based, but then you have stuff that's more like channel-based or like based on ambisonics and extended ambisonics and higher order ambisonics. So you have 3Dception that Facebook bought. You have the Google's spatial audio SDK. You have, Dysonics have some tools that Bob is from. Then you have DTS and their ways of doing elevation, for example, in spatial audio. So there's all these different things that cater to different needs. Plus, the standards body is going to have to fight against all these different vendors actually running businesses and trying to make a living off of these things and forcing them to be hammered into a certain mold. There were more hands up, but we will congregate in the back here after and be able to answer some more questions. We got to make room for the next crew on stage after this one.
It's a really quick one. I'm just wondering, as far as VR goes, has there been any work as far as like, if you wanted to add a sound that maybe came from behind you, you're looking away, and the sound's there when you're not looking that direction, but it is there, like.
Yeah, that's pretty
character
trivial
says,
to do
"Oh,
in a
God."
game engine, because in a game engine you have sound objects that will emit sound depending on game mechanisms or game events. So you can have the user's head tracking can be an event that you trigger the sound playback on, and then you have a sound engine that specializes that sound to come from a certain direction or a certain object relative to user's head tracking. And so a sound that's not even there when you're looking at it, yeah, you just mute that channel if you're head tracking in that direction, and if the head tracking is sufficiently far away, that triggers a game event, that triggers the sound to play, runs through the spatialization, which places it spatially at a certain position relative to your head in headphones. Okay, thank you guys.
Hello, hello. Okay, real quick. I thought maybe we can end by if you guys have had any really amazing kind of VR audio experiences in particular. If you guys have had those experiences, maybe you could share it with people real quick. Keep it brief. Something to look out for.
It is finally available in the Oculus Mobile Home store, so for Gear VR, called Notes on Blindness. It's an audio-centric experience. Still has a big visual component, but the audio part is really important in that. I recommend everyone with a Gear VR to try that. Notes on Blindness.
I'm going to plug our own app that was actually developed by Media Monks. That we have a bunch of representatives walking the show. It is also an audio first with sort of supporting visuals application that just sort of really demonstrates some of the capability of spatialization and the audioscape.
I'd say anything by the director Chris Milk. He really knows how to do audio really well. He did a production with Apple Music with U2 that is really phenomenal, because he doesn't just use audio to direct, he actually uses audio to misdirect, which means that he did his crossfades when you're looking at something else and things like that. Really recommend that, and that's available on the usual platforms.
And I'll take some credit for that audio engine, by the way.